Welcome to Eliza's Stories. We hope you have a relaxing time enjoying our story. She gave her a second life, but no one was ready for what came next. She walked into the salon for a wedding trial, not knowing it would become her second home. And one day, her only lifeline. They laughed, they gossiped, they shared stories over hairdryers and sweet tea until the bride collapsed. And suddenly, friendship turned into sacrifice. A stranger offered her kidney, a town held its breath, and a mother prepared to say goodbye twice. But this isn't just a story about illness. It's about the kind of love that doesn't need blood ties, the kind that saves lives. Stay with us, because once you meet these women, you'll never forget them. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Beverly Murphy's hair salon on Magnolia Street in Willowbrook, Georgia. The scent of hairspray and sweet tea mingled in the warm air as Bev unlocked the front door, her auburn curls already perfectly coiffed despite the early hour. She had owned this little slice of heaven for 15 years now, and every morning felt like opening her home to her dearest friends. Lord have mercy, it's already hot as blazes out there, Bev muttered to herself, flipping on the lights and checking her appointment book. Emma Richardson's name was written in bold letters across the top of the page, followed by wedding hair. Extra time needed in Bev's careful handwriting. The thought made her smile, remembering the little girl with pigtails who used to play with hair clips while her mama got her weekly set. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah Collins slipped inside, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was still new to Willowbrook, having arrived just 3 months ago with nothing but a suitcase and a cosmetology license. There was something mysterious about Sarah, something that made the other ladies whisper when she wasn't around. But Bev had taken her in without question. "Morning, Miss Bev," Sarah said softly, tying her apron around her waist. "I've got Mrs. Whitman's perm solution ready, and I double-checked the temperature on the rollers." Her voice carried the faintest trace of an accent that nobody could quite place, and her eyes held secrets that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Bev nodded approvingly as she arranged her brushes and combs with the precision of a surgeon preparing for operation. "You're a blessing, honey. Dot Whitman's been getting her hair done here longer than Moses had whiskers, and she's particular as they come." She paused, glancing at the clock. Emma should be here any minute for her trial run. That girl's getting married in 2 weeks, and her mama's been wound tighter than a tick on a hound dog. The conversation was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of Margaret Richardson's Cadillac pulling into the parking space outside. Through the window, they could see Emma climbing out of the passenger side, her dark hair catching the morning light like silk ribbon. She moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned to listen to her body's warnings, each step measured and deliberate. Emma pushed through the door with her characteristic bright smile, the kind that could light up a room and make you forget all your troubles. "Good morning, ladies. I hope y'all are ready to work miracles today, because this mop of hair has a mind of its own." She gestured to her thick, chestnut waves that tumbled past her shoulders. Behind her, Maggie Richardson followed with the determined expression of a general planning a military campaign. "Emma, darling, your hair is beautiful," Bev said, guiding her to the styling chair. "We're just going to enhance what the good Lord gave you. Sarah, would you be a dear and get Emma some sweet tea?" She caught Sarah's eye in the mirror and nodded toward the small refrigerator, where she kept refreshments for her clients. It was these little touches that made Beverly's salon feel more like a living room than a place of business. Maggie settled into the waiting area, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap. At 52, she was still a striking woman, with Emma's same dark hair. Though hers was always perfectly styled in a conservative bob, she watched her daughter with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse, and everyone in Willowbrook knew why. Emma's diabetes had been a shadow hanging over their family since she was 7 years old, and the approaching wedding had only intensified Maggie's protective instincts. "Now, tell me exactly what you have in mind for the big day," Bev said, running her fingers through Emma's hair to assess its texture and length. "I was thinking we could do something elegant, but not too formal. Something that'll photograph well, but won't wilt in this Georgia heat." She caught Emma's eyes in the mirror and winked. "And something that won't require you to sit still for 3 hours getting ready." Emma laughed, the sound like wind chimes on a summer evening. "You know me too well, Miss Bev. I was hoping for something that looks complicated but isn't, if that makes any sense. Michael loves my hair down, but Mama thinks I should wear it up for the ceremony." She glanced over at her mother, who was pretending to read a magazine, while obviously listening to every word. A bride should wear her hair however makes her feel beautiful, came a gravelly voice from the doorway. Dorothy Whitman stood there like a small hurricane, her silver hair wrapped in a silk scarf, and her sharp blue eyes taking in the scene with characteristic bluntness. At 73, Dot had earned the right to speak her mind, and she exercised that right with considerable enthusiasm. "Good morning, Miss Dot," Emma said warmly, genuinely pleased to see the older woman. Despite her reputation for being cantankerous, Dot had always had a soft spot for Emma, perhaps because she saw something of her younger self in the girl's stubborn determination to live life on her own terms. Dot settled into her usual chair, with the careful movements of someone whose joints had logged many miles. "I suppose you'll be wanting the usual torture treatment, Miss Dot?" Bev asked with good-natured resignation. Dorothy Whitman had been getting the same perm every 6 weeks for the past 2 decades, and any suggestion of changing it was met with the kind of resistance usually reserved for foreign invasions. "If it was good enough for my grandmother, it's good enough for me," Dot replied tartly. Though there was affection in her voice, she had been coming to this salon since before Bev owned it, back when old Mrs. Henderson ran the place with an iron fist and questionable color-mixing skills. "At least you know what you're doing, unlike some people in this town who think beauty comes from a bottle bought at the Piggly Wiggly." The bell chimed again as Helen Carmichael made her grand entrance, her platinum blonde hair teased to impressive heights, and her jewelry catching the light like a disco ball. At 65, Helen was Willowbrook's unofficial social director and the widow of the town's former mayor. She had enough money to get her hair done anywhere she pleased, but she chose Beverly's salon because she genuinely enjoyed the company of these women. Well, look who's here," Helen announced, setting down her patent leather purse and surveying the room like a queen greeting her court. "Emma, honey, you look absolutely radiant. Marriage agrees with you already, and you haven't even walked down the aisle yet." She air-kissed Emma's cheek carefully, mindful of the girl's hair that Bev was already beginning to section and pin. Sarah moved quietly around the salon, preparing Dot's perm solution with the concentration of a scientist mixing volatile chemicals. She had learned in her short time here that each of these women required a different approach, a different level of attention and care. Dot demanded precision and no nonsense. Helen expected to be entertained and fussed over, and Emma needed someone who understood that her diabetes meant she couldn't sit still for hours without checking her blood sugar. "So tell us about the dress," Helen said, settling into her chair for what she clearly expected to be a long and entertaining conversation. "I heard Martha Sinclair saw you coming out of that boutique in Savannah with a dress bag, and she's been dying to know what you picked." Helen's eyes sparkled with the joy of someone who lived for gossip and social details. Though her interest was born from genuine affection rather than malice, Emma's face lit up as she described the vintage-inspired gown she had chosen, her hands moving expressively as she talked about the delicate beadwork and the way the silk fell from her hips. "It's nothing too fancy, just something that feels like me. I wanted something I could dance in. You know, what's the point of a beautiful dress if you can't move in it?" Maggie looked up from her magazine, her expression softening as she watched her daughter's animated description. There had been a time, years ago, when she had wondered if Emma would live to see her wedding day, and the reality of it still sometimes caught her off guard. Those early years after the diagnosis had been filled with hospital visits and careful monitoring, with the constant fear that one mistake could be fatal. "The important thing is that you feel beautiful," Maggie said quietly, her voice carrying years of worry wrapped in love. "Everything else is just details." She met Bev's eyes in the mirror and saw understanding there. Beverly Murphy had been doing hair long enough to recognize the look of a mother trying to let go while holding on with every fiber of her being. Bev began the delicate work of creating finger waves along Emma's hairline, her experienced hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that came from decades of practice. "You know, honey, I did your mama's hair for her wedding day. Back when she was about your age, she was just as nervous as you are. Maybe more so because your daddy was shipping out 2 weeks after the honeymoon." The mention of Emma's father brought a moment of quiet to the salon. James Richardson had been a good man, a devoted husband and father who had worked hard to provide for his family, until a heart attack took him 5 years ago. His absence was still felt keenly, particularly at moments like these when traditions called for a father's presence. Daddy would have loved this, Emma said softly, meeting her mother's eyes in the mirror. He would have been fussing about the cost of the flowers and complaining about having to wear a tuxedo, but he would have loved every minute of it. The sadness in her voice was tempered by warmth, by the kind of love that doesn't diminish with death. Helen reached over and squeezed Emma's hand gently. Your daddy's watching over you. Honey, I guarantee he'll be right there in that church, probably trying to tell the preacher to hurry up so he can get to the reception and show off his dancing skills. Her voice was warm with the kind of certainty that comes from having lived long enough to understand that love transcends physical presence. Sarah, who had been quietly working on Dot's perm, looked up with interest. She had heard stories about James Richardson from various clients, but she was still learning the intricate web of relationships and histories that connected everyone in Willowbrook. In the 3 months since she had arrived in town, she had come to understand that in a place like this, everyone's story was woven together with invisible threads of shared experience and mutual support. What about you, Sarah? Helen asked, with the kind of friendly curiosity that could either be welcoming or intrusive, depending on the delivery. Do you have family somewhere who'll be coming to the wedding? Emma's inviting half the town, so there's room for everyone. Helen's question was gently posed, as if she sensed that Sarah's past might be a delicate subject. Sarah's hands paused for just a moment in their work, before she continued rolling Dot's hair onto the small perm rods. No family to speak of, she said simply, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of old pain. But I'd be honored to come if Emma would have me. I've never been to a real Southern wedding before. Of course you'll come, Emma said immediately, as if the idea that Sarah wouldn't be invited had never occurred to her. You're part of our little family here now, whether you like it or not. Miss Bev, make sure Sarah knows she's expected at the church with bells on. The warmth in Emma's voice was genuine, reflecting the kind of open-hearted generosity that had made her beloved in Willowbrook since childhood. Dot, who had been characteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Girls got secrets, she said bluntly, though not unkindly. Everybody's got secrets. The question is whether they're the kind of secrets that hurt people or the kind that just make life more interesting. She met Sarah's startled gaze in the mirror, with eyes that held unexpected compassion. This is a good place for fresh starts, if that's what you're looking for. The honesty of Dot's words seemed to break something open in the room, creating a moment of understanding that transcended the usual polite conversation of acquaintances. Sarah's eyes filled with unshed tears, though she continued working steadily, her professional training overriding her emotional response. Thank you, she whispered, and everyone understood that she was thanking them for more than just the wedding invitation. Bev continued working on Emma's hair, creating an elegant updo that looked effortless but required considerable skill to achieve. You know, some of my favorite memories have happened right here in these chairs, she mused, her fingers working with practiced ease. I've seen babies take their first steps between that shampoo bowl and the front door. I've listened to more love stories and heartbreaks than a country songwriter. This place has seen it all, including that time Mrs. Patterson's cat got loose in here during the 4th of July celebration, Helen added with a laugh, remembering the chaos that had ensued when Duchess, a particularly temperamental Persian, had somehow escaped her carrier and taken refuge under the hairdryer. Poor Bev was chasing that cat around with a butterfly net, while Mrs. Patterson sat there getting her nails done like nothing was happening. Emma giggled at the mental image, causing Bev to pause in her work until the laughter subsided. Hold still, sugar, or you're going to end up looking like you stuck your finger in a light socket. But Bev was smiling too, remembering the incident with the kind of fondness that comes from years of shared experiences and mutual affection. The morning continued with the comfortable rhythm of women who had known each other for years, punctuated by the gentle sounds of the salon, scissors snipping, hair dryers humming, the soft splash of water in the shampoo bowl. Sarah gradually relaxed as she worked, responding to the inclusive warmth of the group with small smiles and occasional contributions to the conversation. As Bev put the finishing touches on Emma's practice hairstyle, stepping back to admire her work with the critical eye of an artist, examining a painting. She felt the satisfaction that came from creating something beautiful. What do you think? Honey, this is just a trial run, but I think we've got the right idea. Emma turned her head carefully from side to side, examining her reflection with growing delight. The style was elegant, yet romantic, with soft curls framing her face, and the rest of her hair swept up in a way that looked both formal and effortless. Oh, Miss Bev, it's perfect. It's exactly what I was hoping for, but couldn't quite describe. Maggie rose from her chair to get a better look, her face lighting up with maternal pride and relief. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Your daddy would be so proud. She touched Emma's shoulder gently, mindful of disturbing the hairstyle, and for a moment, the salon was filled with the quiet contentment that comes from shared joy. Now remember, Bev said, beginning to remove the pins and carefully document the process for the wedding day. Eat a good breakfast the morning of the wedding, and make sure you check your blood sugar before we start. I don't want you getting lightheaded while I'm working on you. Her practical concern was wrapped in affection, the kind of maternal fussing that came naturally to women who had spent their lives taking care of others. Emma nodded, understanding the underlying concern, even as she appreciated being treated normally rather than like an invalid. I promise. Miss Bev, Michael's already planning to make me his famous blueberry pancakes that morning. He says if I'm going to be nervous, I should at least be well-fed and nervous. The mention of Michael brought smiles to every face in the salon. Michael Hayes was a local boy who had grown up to become a veterinarian, and his courtship of Emma had been the kind of sweet, old-fashioned romance that made everyone in Willowbrook believe in true love. He had proposed on the banks of the Oconee River, at the same spot where they had shared their first kiss 10 years earlier when they were both 18 and thought they knew everything about love. As the appointment wound down and Emma prepared to leave, the salon began to empty gradually. Helen kissed everyone goodbye with theatrical flourishes. Dot grumbled good-naturedly about the heat while secretly pleased with her fresh perm, and Sarah began the process of cleaning and preparing for the next day's clients. The comfortable routine of the salon continued, a steady rhythm that had become the heartbeat of this small community of women. Standing at the window, watching Emma and Maggie drive away in the familiar Cadillac, Bev felt the deep satisfaction that came from being part of something larger than herself. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new stories, new joys and sorrows to be shared within these walls. But today had been perfect in its own small way, a reminder of why she loved what she did, and the women who trusted her with their hair and their hearts. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the salon floor as Sarah finished her cleaning and prepared to lock up. In 2 weeks, Emma would return for her wedding day, and everything would change. But for now, in this moment, all was well in Beverly's little corner of Willowbrook, Georgia, where friendship was as constant as the changing seasons and love was always worth celebrating. Fan 2, Đám cưới và những quyết định. The morning of Emma's wedding dawned with the kind of perfect Georgia weather that seemed ordered directly from heaven. The sky was a brilliant blue canvas, painted with wisps of white clouds, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of magnolia blossoms through the open windows of Beverly's salon. By 6:30, the lights were already blazing and the coffee was brewing strong, because today was the day they had all been preparing for. Emma arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, accompanied by her bridesmaids and an entourage that seemed to fill every corner of the usually spacious salon. Her maid of honor, Jessica Porter, was her college roommate who had driven down from Atlanta with military precision, armed with emergency kits for everything from broken straps to mascara emergencies. The other bridesmaids were a mix of childhood friends and cousins, all chattering with the nervous excitement that seemed to multiply exponentially when women gathered for such occasions. Good Lord, it looks like a flower garden exploded in here, Dot observed dryly as she surveyed the parade of pink and peach dresses hanging from every available hook and hanger. She had arrived early for her standing Saturday appointment, claiming she wouldn't miss this circus for all the sweet tea in Georgia. I've seen Broadway productions with fewer costume changes. Bev moved through the controlled chaos with the calm efficiency of a general commanding troops, directing traffic and maintaining order, while simultaneously transforming Emma into the vision of bridal beauty she was meant to be. Sarah worked quietly alongside her, having arrived even earlier to help prepare, her gentle hands steady as she assisted with the intricate process of creating the perfect wedding day look. "How are you feeling, Sugar?" Bev asked Emma as she settled into the styling chair, her wedding dress hanging nearby, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Emma's face was glowing with that particular radiance that seemed to emanate from truly happy brides, though Bev's trained eye could detect the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of nerves and perhaps something more concerning. "I'm wonderful," Emma replied, though she immediately checked her blood sugar with the automatic gesture that had become second nature over the years. "Maybe a little nervous, but good nervous, the kind of nervous that means something important is about to happen." She smiled at her reflection in the mirror, but Bev noticed the way she rubbed her temples, a gesture that usually indicated her glucose levels weren't quite where they should be. Maggie hovered nearby, dressed in an elegant navy suit that perfectly complemented her role as mother of the bride. But her eyes never left her daughter for more than a few seconds. She had been up since 4 o'clock, double-checking every detail and fighting the urge to call Michael and make sure he hadn't changed his mind overnight. The morning had been a carefully orchestrated series of small crises and solutions, from a broken zipper on one bridesmaid's dress to a forgotten pair of shoes that had required an emergency trip across town. "Did you eat breakfast like we discussed?" Bev asked, beginning the familiar ritual of sectioning Emma's hair with the same precision she had used 2 weeks earlier during the trial run. "And please tell me you've been drinking water instead of living on coffee and wedding nerves." Her concern was disguised as casual conversation, but everyone in the salon knew that Beverly Murphy took the health and well-being of her clients as seriously as she took their appearance. Emma nodded, though her smile was slightly sheepish. "Michael made his blueberry pancakes, just like he promised, and I ate every bite, even though my stomach was doing somersaults. He also reminded me to pack extra test strips and glucose tablets in my purse." She gestured to her bridal bag, which looked more like a small pharmacy than a typical bride's emergency kit, but which represented the reality of her daily life. Helen arrived fashionably late, as was her custom, sweeping into the salon with the dramatic flair of someone who understood that every entrance should be memorable. Her hair was already perfectly coiffed, courtesy of her usual Friday afternoon appointment, but she had come to offer moral support and to ensure she didn't miss any of the excitement. "Emma, darling, you look absolutely luminous," she declared, kissing the air near Emma's cheek to avoid disturbing Bev's work. "Mrs. Carmichael, you didn't have to come so early," Emma protested, though her face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing Helen. "You should be getting ready for the ceremony yourself." Helen had been like a surrogate grandmother to Emma since James Richardson's death, stepping in to fill some of the empty spaces left by his absence. With her characteristic warmth and generosity. "Nonsense," Helen replied, settling into her usual chair with the satisfied air of someone exactly where she belonged. "I've been ready for weddings since I was 6 years old, and dressed up my cat in a dollhouse wedding dress. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on all you young ladies and make sure nobody has a case of pre-wedding hysteria." Sarah moved quietly through the salon, assisting wherever needed, and observing the controlled chaos with fascination. In her previous life, before Willowbrook, she had never been part of such intimate celebrations, and the warmth and inclusion she felt from these women still caught her off guard sometimes. She had been invited not just to the wedding ceremony, but to participate in these precious getting-ready moments, and the trust implicit in that invitation made her eyes unexpectedly misty. "Sarah, honey, would you help Jessica with her hair?" Bev called out, gesturing toward the maid of honor, who was struggling with a complicated updo that looked deceptively simple, but required professional skill to execute properly. "Use those bobby pins that don't show, and remember to spray each section as you go." Sarah nodded and moved to help, her hands confident and gentle as she worked to create order from chaos. As the morning progressed, the salon filled with the kind of comfortable chatter that comes from women working together toward a common goal. Stories were shared, advice was dispensed, and the bonds of friendship were strengthened through the simple act of caring for one another. Emma remained the serene center of the storm, her natural grace and good humor keeping everyone calm, even as the complexity of the preparations increased. "I have something for you," Maggie said quietly, approaching Emma's chair with a small velvet box in her hands. Her voice carried the weight of emotion carefully controlled, and everyone in the salon seemed to sense the significance of the moment. "These were your grandmother's pearls, the ones she wore when she married your grandfather in 1943. I've been saving them for your wedding day." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she opened the box to reveal a delicate strand of pearls that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Oh, Mama, they are beautiful. Are you sure you want me to wear them? What if something happens to them?" Her concern was genuine, born from the understanding that some things are too precious to risk losing, but also from her awareness that her condition sometimes made her more accident-prone than she would like. "They're meant to be worn by brides in our family," Maggie replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Your grandmother would roll over in her grave if she thought they were just sitting in a jewelry box, when they could be part of your special day." She fastened the clasp herself, her fingers gentle at the nape of Emma's neck, and for a moment, the salon was filled with the kind of reverent silence that accompanies truly meaningful moments. Bev stepped back to admire her work, Emma's hair now styled in the elegant updo they had practiced, but somehow even more beautiful than the trial run had been. The pearls nestled perfectly at the base of Emma's throat, complementing the style and adding a touch of vintage elegance that seemed to complete the bridal vision. "You look like a princess," she announced with satisfaction, and I don't say that lightly. The transformation from nervous bride to radiant vision seemed to happen in that moment, as Emma caught sight of herself in the mirror and gasped with genuine surprise. The woman looking back at her was confident, beautiful, and ready to take on the world with the man she loved by her side. "I can't believe that's really me," she whispered, touching her reflection gently as if to confirm its reality. "Believe it, sugar," Dot said gruffly from her corner, where she had been observing the proceedings with the critical eye of someone who had seen plenty of brides in her 73 years. "You clean up real nice when you put your mind to it," coming from Dorothy Whitman. This was effusive praise indeed, and Emma's smile in response could have powered the entire salon. The bridesmaids gathered around Emma for photographs, their own hair and makeup completed with Sarah's capable assistance, creating a tableau of feminine beauty and friendship that would be treasured in photo albums for generations to come. The morning had become a celebration of not just Emma's wedding, but of the bonds that connected all of these women across generations and circumstances. "Time to get you into that dress," Jessica announced, checking her watch with the precision of a wedding coordinator. "The photographer will be here in 20 minutes, and we need to have you completely ready for the formal portraits." She had been managing the timeline with military efficiency, ensuring that every moment was accounted for and every detail was perfect. The process of helping Emma into her wedding dress was handled with the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. The gown was even more beautiful than memory had suggested, the silk seeming to flow like water, and the delicate beadwork catching the light with every movement. When the last button was fastened and the last adjustment made, Emma stood before the mirror, transformed into the bride she had always dreamed of becoming. Maggie's composure finally cracked as she saw her daughter in full bridal regalia, tears streaming down her face. Despite her careful makeup, "You're so beautiful," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I wish your daddy could see you right now. He would be so proud, so incredibly proud." The mention of James Richardson brought a moment of sweet sadness to the room. His absence felt keenly, but his love still present in every detail of the day. "He can see me, Mama," Emma said softly, taking her mother's hands in her own. "I can feel him here with us. He's probably fussing about the cost of all this and wondering why weddings have to be so complicated. But he's here." Her certainty was comforting, not just to Maggie, but to everyone in the room who had loved James Richardson and missed his steady presence. The photographer arrived precisely on schedule, a cheerful woman named Lisa, who had been capturing Willowbrook weddings for the past decade and knew exactly how to work with nervous brides and emotional mothers. She quickly set up her equipment and began the process of documenting this perfect morning, her camera capturing not just the beauty of the bride, but the love and support that surrounded her. As the formal portraits progressed, Emma's confidence grew with each flash of the camera. She was a natural in front of the lens, her genuine joy and excitement translating into photographs that would become treasured family heirlooms. The bridesmaids joined in for group shots, their laughter and easy camaraderie evident in every frame, creating memories that would last long after the flowers had faded and the dress was carefully preserved in tissue paper. "Ladies, we need to start thinking about heading to the church," Jessica announced, consulting her carefully planned timeline. "The ceremony is in 2 hours, and we still need to get everyone transported and make sure all the final details are in place." Her organizational skills had been invaluable throughout the morning, keeping everyone on track while maintaining the relaxed atmosphere that made the preparation process enjoyable rather than stressful. Bev began the careful process of packing up her emergency kit, filled with hairspray, bobby pins, and all the tools necessary to maintain perfection throughout the long day ahead. "I'll meet you at the church in 30 minutes, she promised Emma, "and I'll be right there if you need any touch-ups before the ceremony. Don't worry about a thing. Today is your day to be beautiful and happy." Sarah helped gather the bridesmaids' belongings and coordinate the transportation, her quiet efficiency making the logistics seem effortless. She had become indispensable over the course of the morning, anticipating needs before they were expressed and solving problems before they became crises. The other women had noticed her contributions and made sure she knew how much her help was appreciated. "Sarah, you're riding with Helen and me to the church," Dot announced in her typically direct manner. "No point in you trying to find your own way when we're all going to the same place." The invitation was gruff but genuine, and Sarah's grateful smile showed that she understood the significance of being included in their group. As the entourage prepared to leave the salon, Emma took one last look at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant bride looking back at her. The morning had been everything she had hoped for, and more, filled with love, laughter, and the kind of feminine bonding that creates memories to last a lifetime. "Thank you all so much," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This has been perfect. Absolutely perfect." The procession to First Presbyterian Church of Willowbrook was like a small parade, with cars decorated with white ribbons and filled with excited wedding party members making their way through the familiar streets. Emma rode with her mother and Jessica, her dress carefully arranged to avoid wrinkles, her heart racing with anticipation as they approached the moment she had been dreaming about for months. The church looked like something from a fairy tale, decorated with white roses and baby's breath. The sanctuary filled with soft golden light, filtering through stained glass windows. Michael was already there, having arrived an hour early in his nervousness, looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed in his formal tuxedo. His groomsmen, childhood friends, who had grown up to become doctors and teachers and businessmen, stood ready to support him through the most important day of his life. In the bridal suite at the back of the church, Emma submitted to final touch-ups from Bev, while Jessica fussed over her dress, and the other bridesmaids applied last-minute lip gloss. The excitement was building toward its crescendo, and everyone could feel the electric anticipation that comes just before life-changing moments. "How's your blood sugar, honey?" Maggie asked quietly, her maternal concern never far from the surface. Even on such a joyful day, Emma checked her glucose monitor one more time, nodding with satisfaction at the reading. "Perfect numbers." "Mama, I'm ready for anything." She took a deep breath, centering herself for the walk down the aisle that would transform her from Emma Richardson into Emma Hayes, from a single woman into a wife, from one chapter of her life into the next. The music began, the familiar strains of the wedding march floating through the sanctuary as the processional started. One by one, the bridesmaids made their way down the aisle, their pink and peach dresses creating a garden pathway for the bride to follow. Emma waited in the vestibule, her hand on her mother's arm, until the moment came for her own entrance. The sanctuary fell silent as the bride appeared, her beauty taking everyone's breath away. Michael's face lit up with pure joy as he saw her, his nervousness evaporating in the face of his love for this woman who had agreed to share her life with him. Step by step, Emma moved toward her future, her wedding dress rustling softly against the floor, her heart full of love and hope and the absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity, with vows that spoke of love and commitment, of supporting each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When Michael slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, his hands were steady and sure, and when she repeated her vows to him, her voice was clear and strong. They were married by Reverend Matthews, who had baptized Emma as an infant and confirmed her as a teenager, making the ceremony feel like a homecoming as much as a beginning. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Matthews announced, and Michael's kiss was gentle and reverent, the seal on promises made and a future embraced. The sanctuary erupted in applause and cheers as Mr. and Mrs. Michael Hayes turned to face their community, their faces radiant with happiness and the certain knowledge that they were loved and supported by everyone who mattered to them. The reception at the Willowbrook Country Club was everything a small-town wedding celebration should be, with good food, enthusiastic dancing, and toasts that brought tears of laughter and joy to every eye. Emma danced with her new husband, with her mother, and with every important man in her life, her wedding dress swirling around her like a cloud of dreams made manifest. Her hair, Bev noted with professional pride, remained perfect throughout the entire evening. As the night wound down and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Savannah, Emma made a point of finding each of the women from the salon to thank them personally. To Bev, she gave a heartfelt hug and a promise to see her soon. To Sarah, she offered friendship and the assurance that she would always have a place in their circle. To Helen and Dot, she gave the respect and affection due to women who had helped raise her into the person she had become. "This has been the most perfect day of my life," Emma told her mother as they shared a quiet moment before the departure. "Everything was exactly as I dreamed it would be." Maggie held her daughter close, memorizing the moment and the radiant happiness in Emma's eyes, storing it away like a treasure to be revisited in whatever difficult times might lie ahead. 3 months later, Emma returned to Beverly's salon with news that would change everything once again. She was glowing with a different kind of radiance now, the unmistakable glow of early pregnancy, and her announcement sent shockwaves through the close-knit group of women who had celebrated her wedding day with such joy. "We're having a baby," she said simply, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concerns, everyone remembering the warnings Emma had received from her doctors about the risks of pregnancy for someone with type 1 diabetes. Maggie's face went white, then pink, cycling through emotions too complex to name, while Bev reached out instinctively to steady Emma's chair, as if the news might physically unbalance her. "Are you sure this is what you want, honey?" Helen asked gently, her usual cheerful demeanor subdued by the gravity of the situation. "Have you talked to your doctors? What do they say about the risks?" Her questions came from a place of love and concern, but they echoed the fears that everyone was thinking, but hesitant to voice. Emma's chin lifted with the stubborn determination that had carried her through every challenge her condition had presented. "Michael and I talked about this before we got married. We know the risks, but we also know that some things are worth fighting for. I want to be a mother, and we're going to do everything possible to make sure both the baby and I stay healthy." Dot, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up with her typical bluntness. "Life's risky for everybody, Sugar. The question is whether you're going to let fear make your decisions or whether you're going to live the life you want to live." Her words carried the weight of 7 decades of experience, and her matter-of-fact acceptance of Emma's choice seemed to break the tension in the room. Sarah, who had been quietly working on a client's color, looked up with tears in her eyes. "You'll be a wonderful mother," she said simply, and her certainty seemed to settle something in the atmosphere of the salon. "Any child would be lucky to have you and Michael as parents." Her words carried particular weight because everyone had come to respect her quiet wisdom and genuine insight into human nature. The conversation that followed was careful and loving, with each woman sharing her concerns and her support in equal measure. Maggie struggled the most with Emma's decision, her protective instincts warring with her desire to support her daughter's choices. But eventually, she too came to accept that this was Emma's life to live, with all the joy and risk that entailed. As the months of pregnancy progressed, the salon became a place of anxious monitoring and cautious celebration, with Emma's condition tracked as carefully as her baby's development. Every appointment became a small victory, every good report from the doctor a cause for quiet celebration. The women rallied around Emma with the kind of fierce protectiveness that comes from deep love, creating a network of support that sustained her through the difficult days and shared her joy during the good ones. The day Emma went into labor, 2 weeks before her due date, Bev closed the salon and rushed to the hospital along with the rest of Emma's chosen family. They filled the waiting room with nervous energy and fervent prayers, taking turns supporting Maggie through the long hours of waiting and uncertainty. When the news came that both Emma and the baby were healthy, the celebration could probably be heard throughout the hospital. Baby James Michael Hayes was born weighing 6 pounds, 2 ounces, with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. Emma held him with the confident grace of a woman who had always known she was meant to be a mother, her face radiant with the kind of joy that makes observers believe in miracles. "He's perfect," she whispered to Michael, and for that moment, in that hospital room, surrounded by love, everything in the world was exactly as it should be. Fan 3. The first 6 months of little James Michael's life unfolded like a beautiful dream that everyone was afraid to wake from. Emma threw herself into motherhood with the same determined joy she had brought to every challenge in her life, and watching her with her son was like witnessing a master artist at work with their most treasured creation. She had transformed one of the spare bedrooms in the house she and Michael had bought on Elm Street into a nursery that looked like something from a magazine, complete with hand-painted murals of woodland creatures that Michael had surprised her with during her final trimester. Every Tuesday morning, Emma would arrive at Beverly's salon with James strapped to her chest in a carrier, his tiny fists waving as he took in the familiar sights and sounds of the place that had been so important in his mother's life. The women would gather around him like worshippers at a shrine, marveling at his latest developments and competing for the privilege of holding him, while Emma got her hair trimmed or simply enjoyed a few moments of adult conversation. "Look at those fingers," Helen would coo, letting James wrap his tiny hand around her perfectly manicured index finger. "He's going to be a piano player, mark my words, or maybe a surgeon like his daddy wanted to be, before he decided he preferred 4-legged patients." Helen had appointed herself James's unofficial grandmother, and she took the role seriously, arriving at each salon visit with small gifts and endless enthusiasm for every milestone. Bev had installed a special chair near her station where Emma could nurse James privately when needed, understanding without being told that new motherhood came with its own set of scheduling challenges. "You just make yourself comfortable, honey," she would say, adjusting the lighting to be softer and ensuring Emma had everything she needed. "This little man is welcome here anytime. And don't you ever feel like you need to apologize for bringing him?" Sarah had proven to be surprisingly natural with the baby, her gentle hands and soft voice seeming to calm him instantly when he became fussy. She had volunteered to help Emma with diaper changes and feedings, revealing a competence that suggested she had experience with infants somewhere in her mysterious past. "I had a little brother once," she had explained quietly when Dot asked about her skill with babies, but she didn't elaborate, and nobody pressed for more details. Emma's diabetes management had become more complex after James's birth, her hormones still adjusting and her sleep schedule completely disrupted by the demands of caring for a newborn. She checked her blood sugar more frequently now, always mindful that her health was crucial, not just for herself, but for the tiny life that depended on her. "I can't afford to be careless," she told Maggie during one of their regular mother-daughter visits to the salon. "James needs me to be strong and healthy for a very long time." The warning signs were subtle at first, the kind of small changes that could easily be attributed to the exhaustion and stress of new parenthood. Emma seemed a little more tired than usual, a little less steady on her feet, but she brushed off expressions of concern with her characteristic optimism and determination. "I'm just adjusting to getting up 3 times a night," she would say when someone commented on the dark circles under her eyes. "Once James starts sleeping through the night, I'll be back to my old self." Michael, who had been watching his wife with the trained eye of someone who understood both medicine and deep love, was the first to voice his concerns to the salon women. He stopped by one afternoon while Emma was at a doctor's appointment, his usually cheerful demeanor shadowed with worry that he could no longer hide. "Her blood pressure's been running high," he confided to Bev, who had known him since he was a boy, catching tadpoles in Miller's Creek. "The obstetrician says it's probably just residual effects from the pregnancy, but I'm worried it's something more." Dot, who had been quietly observing Emma's condition, with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen many women struggle with health issues over the years, nodded grimly. "Girl's pushing herself too hard," she said bluntly, "trying to be the perfect mother and the perfect wife and keep up with everything else like she's got superpowers. Something's got to give, and I'm afraid it's going to be her." The conversation was interrupted by Emma's return from her appointment, James sleeping peacefully in his car seat as she maneuvered through the salon door with the practiced efficiency of a mother who had learned to navigate the world with one arm occupied by baby equipment. Her smile was bright as always, but Bev noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she set down the carrier and the way she gripped the back of a chair for a moment before straightening up. "Good news from the doctor," Emma announced, though her voice lacked its usual energy. "Blood pressure's coming down, and he says I'm healing beautifully from the delivery. James is growing like a weed and hitting all his milestones right on schedule." She settled into her usual chair with a sigh that seemed to come from deeper than mere physical tiredness. Helen, who had been arranging flowers at the front desk, looked up with the kind of maternal concern that transcended biological relationships. "That's wonderful, dear, but how are you feeling? Really feeling? Not just what the doctor says about your numbers?" Her question was gentle but insistent, the kind of inquiry that came from someone who genuinely cared about the answer. Emma's pause was just a fraction too long, and everyone in the salon noticed it. "I'm fine," she said finally, but the words carried less conviction than usual. "Maybe a little more tired than I expected to be at this point, but I think that's normal. James is still waking up every few hours, and you know how I am when I don't get enough sleep." She attempted her usual bright smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah, who had been cleaning brushes at the sink, turned around with an expression of gentle concern. "Emma, honey, when's the last time you had a full night's sleep? I mean, really slept, without getting up to check on James or worry about feeding schedules or anything else?" Her question cut to the heart of what everyone was thinking, but hadn't quite known how to ask. "I honestly can't remember," Emma admitted with a laugh that sounded more tired than amused. "But that's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice sleep for the sake of our babies. It's all part of the job description." She reached over to adjust James's blanket, her movements careful and deliberate in a way that suggested she was concentrating harder than such a simple task should require. Maggie, who had been watching this exchange with growing alarm, finally spoke up. "Emma, sweetheart, maybe you should consider getting some help at night, just temporarily, until you're feeling stronger. There's no shame in needing support, especially when you're dealing with everything you have on your plate." Her suggestion was carefully worded, but her worry was evident in every syllable. "Michael helps as much as he can," Emma replied, a slight defensive edge creeping into her voice. "But he has to work, and James is breastfeeding, so there's really only so much anyone else can do. I'll be fine once I adjust to this new schedule. It just takes time." Her insistence on handling everything herself was characteristic, but it was also concerning to the women who loved her. Over the following weeks, Emma's visits to the salon became less frequent, and when she did come in, she seemed increasingly fragile despite her continued protests that everything was fine. James continued to thrive, his chubby cheeks and bright eyes testament to his mother's devoted care. But Emma herself seemed to be fading, even as she poured all her energy into nurturing her son. Her clothes hung a little looser, her step was a little less sure, and her famous radiance seemed dimmed by an exhaustion that went deeper than normal. New mother tiredness. The crisis came on a Thursday morning in late autumn, when the leaves on Magnolia Street were turning gold and red, and the air carried the first hint of winter's approach. Emma had planned to come in for a much-needed haircut, but when 10 o'clock came and went, without her usual punctual arrival, Bev began to worry. She called Emma's house and got no answer, then called Michael's veterinary clinic and learned that he was in surgery and unavailable. "I'm going over there," Maggie announced, grabbing her purse with the kind of determined urgency that brooks no argument. "Something's wrong. Emma never misses appointments without calling, and she's not answering her phone." Her maternal instincts were screaming warnings that she could no longer ignore, and the other women in the salon felt the same electric tension that comes before a storm. Sarah immediately volunteered to go with her, and together they made the short drive to the house on Elm Street. In record time, they found Emma's car in the driveway and the front door unlocked, but the house was eerily quiet, despite the fact that James should have been awake for his morning feeding. "Emma," Maggie called out, her voice tight with fear as they made their way through the living room toward the nursery. They found Emma unconscious on the floor of James's room, the baby crying in his crib, but otherwise unharmed. She had apparently collapsed while reaching for him, and by the grace of God had fallen away from the crib rather than into it. Maggie immediately called 911 while Sarah checked Emma's pulse and breathing, her hands steady despite her fear as she applied the basic first aid she had learned somewhere in her mysterious past. The ambulance seemed to take forever to arrive, though the paramedics later said they had made the trip in record time. Emma regained consciousness briefly as they loaded her onto the gurney. Her first words, a whispered inquiry about James's well-being. "He's fine, sweetheart," Maggie assured her, holding her daughter's hand as they wheeled her toward the ambulance. "He's perfectly fine, and you're going to be fine too." Michael met them at Willowbrook General Hospital, his face pale with fear, but his medical training keeping him focused on what needed to be done. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Patricia Williams, had been Emma's physician since childhood and understood the complexities of her condition better than most. After a thorough examination and a battery of tests, her diagnosis was both expected and devastating. Emma's kidneys were failing, a complication of her long-term diabetes that had been accelerated by the stresses of pregnancy and childbirth. "We need to talk about treatment options," Dr. Williams told the family gathered in the small conference room off the main hospital corridor. "Emma's kidney function has deteriorated significantly, and she's going to need dialysis while we evaluate her candidacy for a transplant. The good news is that she's young and otherwise healthy, which makes her an excellent candidate for the transplant list." The word transplant hung in the air like a physical presence, changing everything with its implications of lengthy waits, complex procedures, and uncertain outcomes. Maggie felt the world shift around her, the comfortable assumptions of normal life crumbling in the face of this new reality. "How long?" she asked, though she wasn't sure if she was asking about dialysis, transplant wait times, or something else entirely. "The average wait for a kidney transplant is 3 to 5 years," Dr. Williams replied gently, but Emma's young age and good overall health could work in her favor. In the meantime, dialysis will keep her stable and allow her to continue caring for James, though she'll need to make some significant lifestyle adjustments. Her professional calm was reassuring, but it couldn't entirely mask the gravity of the situation. Michael, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up with the kind of quiet determination that surprised everyone. "What about living donor transplant? I've already been tested for compatibility with Emma's blood type, and I want to be evaluated as a potential donor." His offer was immediate and absolute, the response of a man who would do anything to save the woman he loved. "Living donor transplant is definitely an option we should explore," Dr. Williams agreed, "but we'll also want to test other family members to see if anyone else might be a suitable match. Sometimes siblings or parents can be even better matches than spouses." She looked directly at Maggie, whose face had already taken on the expression of someone prepared to undergo any test, any procedure, any sacrifice necessary to help her daughter. The testing process began immediately, with blood drawn from every willing family member and friend who met the basic health requirements. The salon women rallied around the family with the kind of fierce loyalty that small communities are famous for, organizing meal trains and childcare schedules and whatever else might be needed to support Emma through this crisis. Helen took charge of coordinating the practical details, while Dot surprised everyone by volunteering to be tested as a potential donor, despite her age. "Don't be ridiculous," she told Dr. Williams when the physician gently suggested that a 73-year-old might not be an ideal donor candidate. "I've got 2 perfectly good kidneys and about 15 good years left in me, if I'm lucky. Emma's got a whole lifetime ahead of her and a baby to raise. You test me, just like you test everyone else." Sarah, who had never mentioned her own medical history to anyone, quietly asked to be included in the testing process. When the initial blood work came back, showing that she was a potential match, she sat in the hospital waiting room and wept with a mixture of hope and fear that surprised her with its intensity. "I want to help," she told Emma when they discussed the possibility. "You've all given me so much since I came to Willowbrook. Let me give something back." The test results, when they finally came back after what seemed like an eternity of waiting, brought both relief and surprise. Maggie was indeed an excellent match for her daughter, with compatibility markers that made transplant success highly likely. But Sarah's results were even better, showing a level of compatibility that Dr. Williams called remarkable and almost like your sisters. I don't understand how that's possible, Sarah said, staring at the test results with an expression of confusion and wonder. I don't have any family connection to Emma or her family. I'm not even from Georgia originally. Her puzzlement was genuine, and it sparked a conversation about genetic coincidences and the mysterious ways that biological compatibility can transcend family relationships. Emma, who had been undergoing dialysis 3 times a week while the testing was completed, looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. Are you absolutely sure about this? Kidney donation is major surgery, and there are risks involved. I can't ask you to do something so dangerous for me. Her concern for Sarah was genuine, even in the face of her own desperate need for a transplant. You're not asking, Sarah replied firmly. I'm offering, and I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You and these women have given me a family when I thought I'd never have one again. Let me do this for you, Emma. Let me help save your life so you can watch James grow up and have more babies and live the life you're meant to live. The decision to proceed with Sarah as the donor was made after extensive counseling and evaluation, with both women fully understanding the risks and benefits involved. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in February, when the winter light was pale and the air was sharp with cold, but the promise of spring was already stirring in the bare branches of the trees surrounding the hospital. The night before the surgery, the salon women gathered at Emma's bedside for what had become their own private ritual of support and encouragement. Helen brought flowers from her own greenhouse. Dot contributed a bottle of her famous homemade vegetable soup for Emma's post-surgery recovery, and Bev offered to do Emma's hair as soon as she was feeling up to it after the procedure. I'm scared, Emma admitted, as they sat in the quiet hospital room, James sleeping peacefully in Michael's arms and the machines monitoring her condition, beeping softly in the background. Not of the surgery itself, but of what it means for Sarah. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm asking too much of her? Her vulnerability was heartbreaking, and it reminded everyone of how young she still was, despite all she had been through. Nothing's going to go wrong, Maggie said with the fierce certainty of a mother's love. You're both strong, healthy women, and Dr. Williams is one of the best surgeons in the state. Tomorrow night, you're going to have a new kidney, and Sarah's going to be a hero, and we're all going to celebrate with the biggest party Willowbrook has ever seen. Her confidence was infectious, and everyone in the room felt their spirits lift in response to her determination. The surgery itself took 6 hours, with Sarah's procedure beginning first to ensure that her kidney was ready for immediate transplantation into Emma. Both women were surrounded by teams of skilled medical professionals, and the surgical waiting room filled with family and friends who had come to offer support. During the long, anxious hours of waiting, Michael paced the corridors with James, unable to sit still, while Maggie clutched Helen's hand and prayed with an intensity that surprised her with its fervor. When Dr. Williams finally emerged from the operating room, her scrubs rumpled and her face tired but smiling, the waiting room erupted in cheers and tears of relief. Both procedures went perfectly, she announced. Sarah's doing beautifully, and Emma's new kidney is already producing urine, which is exactly what we want to see. They're both going to need several days of recovery, but I expect full recovery for both of them. The weeks that followed were filled with careful monitoring and gradual healing, with both women supported by a network of love and care that seemed to speed the recovery beyond all medical expectations. Emma's color returned first, then her energy, and finally her radiant smile that had been dimmed by months of illness. Sarah's recovery was equally remarkable. Her quiet strength, carrying her through the post-surgical challenges with the same grace she had brought to every other aspect of her life in Willowbrook. 3 months after the transplant, Emma returned to Beverly's salon for her first real haircut since before James was born. She looked like herself again, healthy and vibrant and ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. Sarah was there too, the two women now connected by something deeper than friendship, a bond that had been forged in sacrifice and sealed in love. How do you thank someone for giving you your life back? Emma asked as Bev worked carefully around the small scar on her neck where the dialysis catheter had been inserted. I mean, what words exist for something like that? How do you repay a gift that's literally priceless? Her question was rhetorical, but it spoke to the depth of gratitude and wonder that had characterized her recovery. You don't repay it, Sarah replied simply, her own hair being styled by one of Bev's newer assistants. You honor it by living the best life you can, by raising that beautiful boy to be a good man, by loving your husband and your family and making every day count. That's all the repayment I need. Her words carried the quiet wisdom that had drawn them all to her from the beginning. And they settled over the salon like a blessing. As spring turned to summer and Emma's strength continued to return, life in Willowbrook began to settle into new patterns that accommodated the changes brought by illness and healing. Emma returned to her role as devoted mother and wife, but with a deeper appreciation for every ordinary moment and every small joy. James continued to thrive, his bright eyes and ready smile a constant reminder of what had been at stake and what had been preserved through love and sacrifice. The salon remained the heart of their small community of women, a place where triumphs were celebrated and sorrows were shared, where the bonds of friendship were strengthened through both crisis and joy. Emma's recovery had been a victory for all of them, proof that love and determination could overcome even the most frightening challenges, and their shared experience had deepened their connections in ways that would last for the rest of their lives. But even as they celebrated Emma's restored health and Sarah's generous sacrifice, there was an unspoken understanding among them that life remained fragile and uncertain, that the reprieve they had been given was precious precisely because it was not guaranteed to last forever. They treasured each ordinary Tuesday morning at the salon, each shared laugh and moment of fellowship, knowing that such simple pleasures were actually the most extraordinary gifts of all. Fan 4. Sự chia ly và sức mạnh tình bạn. The first signs of trouble came during the hottest summer on record in Willowbrook, when the Georgia heat seemed to press down on the town like a heavy blanket, and the air conditioning units hummed constantly just to keep the unbearable temperatures at bay. Emma had been doing beautifully for over 2 years since the transplant, her new kidney functioning perfectly, and her energy levels higher than they had been since before James was born. She had even begun talking with Michael about having another baby, though they both understood the risks and complications that would be involved. It was during one of those sweltering July mornings that Emma arrived at Beverly's salon looking slightly flushed and complaining of a headache that aspirin couldn't touch. "I'm probably just dehydrated," she said as she settled into her usual chair. James, now a toddler who could walk, and was fascinated by all the colorful bottles and brushes in the salon. "This heat is enough to knock anyone flat, and I haven't been drinking as much water as I should." Sarah, who had become even more attuned to Emma's health since the transplant, noticed the slight tremor in Emma's hands as she reached for her purse. "Honey, when's the last time you had your blood work done?" she asked gently, kneeling down to James's level as he explored the fascinating world of the salon with the fearless curiosity of a 2-year-old. "Doctor, Williams said you needed to keep up with the regular monitoring, especially during stressful times. I'm due for labs next week," Emma replied, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "Michael's been after me to get them done early, but I've been feeling so good that I didn't think it was necessary. You know how doctors are. They want to test everything all the time, even when you're perfectly healthy." She attempted her characteristic bright smile, but it seemed to require more effort than usual. Bev, who had been cutting hair for 30 years and had developed an almost supernatural ability to read her clients' moods and physical conditions, paused in her work on Helen's weekly set. "Emma, sugar, you look a little peaked to me. Maybe you should call Dr. Williams and see if she can fit you in today instead of waiting until next week." Her suggestion was casual, but her eyes were sharp with concern as she studied Emma's reflection in the mirror. The conversation was interrupted by James, who had discovered the fascinating spinning chairs and was attempting to climb onto one, while babbling excitedly in the mixture of words and sounds that constituted his rapidly developing vocabulary. "Mama, up, up," he demanded, reaching his chubby arm toward Emma with the absolute confidence that she would always be there to lift him up and make everything better. Emma started to reach for her son, then paused and gripped the arm of her chair as a wave of dizziness washed over her. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for every woman in the salon to notice, and the sudden silence that fell over the room was heavy with unspoken fear. "I'm fine," Emma said quickly, though her voice was slightly breathless, just stood up too fast. It happens to everyone. Dot, who had been reading a magazine in the corner while waiting for her appointment, looked up with the kind of sharp attention that had served her well through 7 decades of observing human nature. Girl, you're white as a sheet and shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. That's not standing up too fast. That's something else entirely. Her bluntness was typical, but it was tempered with the kind of genuine concern that she rarely allowed herself to show. Helen immediately took charge of James, lifting him onto her lap and distracting him with her collection of colorful bracelets, while the other women focused on Emma. Sweetheart, I think we need to call Michael and have him meet us at the hospital, she said, her usual theatrical manner replaced by calm efficiency. This might be nothing, but it might be something, and it's better to be safe than sorry. No hospital, Emma protested, though her voice was weak, and her face had indeed gone pale despite the heat. I just need to sit here for a minute and drink some water. James gets scared at the hospital, and Michael's got a full schedule of appointments today. I don't want to disrupt everyone's day over nothing. Her stubborn independence was as strong as ever, but her body was clearly struggling with something beyond normal fatigue. Sarah knelt beside Emma's chair, her face gentle but determined as she took her friend's hand. Emma, honey, listen to me. After everything we've been through together, don't you think I know when something's really wrong? This isn't about disrupting anyone's day. This is about making sure you're okay, so you can be here for James and Michael and all of us for a long, long time. The authority in Sarah's voice, born from their shared experience of surgery and recovery, seemed to break through Emma's resistance. She nodded slowly, acknowledging that her body was telling her something she didn't want to hear, and allowed the women to help her to Helen's car, while Bev called Michael's clinic to let him know they were heading to the hospital. James rode on Helen's lap, still fascinated by her jewelry and blissfully unaware that his mother was fighting against something that threatened to change everything once again. Dr. Williams met them in the emergency room, her face grave as she reviewed Emma's symptoms and ordered an immediate battery of tests. The blood work that came back 2 hours later confirmed everyone's worst fears. Emma's kidney function was declining rapidly, and the anti-rejection medications that had kept her healthy for 2 years were no longer working effectively. We're looking at chronic rejection. Dr. Williams explained to the family gathered in the small consultation room. It's not uncommon, but it's serious. The words hit the room like physical blows, each person processing the implications in their own way. Michael's medical training allowed him to understand immediately what this meant, and his face cycled through disbelief, anger, and determination in the space of a few seconds. Maggie simply stared at the doctor, as if willing her to take back the words and deliver different news. James, sensing the tension in the room, began to fuss and reach for his mother, with the instinctive knowledge that something was wrong. What are our options? Emma asked, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. She had been through too much to fall apart now, and her primary concern was making sure James didn't sense her fear. Can we increase the medications? Try different ones. What about another transplant? Her questions came rapidly, as if asking them quickly enough might produce answers that would fix everything. Dr. Williams's response was gentle but realistic. We can try adjusting your medication regimen, but chronic rejection is progressive, which means it is likely to continue getting worse despite our efforts. Eventually, you'll need another transplant, but in the meantime, we'll need to start dialysis again to support your kidney function. The familiar treatment plan seemed both reassuring and devastating, a return to the routine that had sustained Emma before, but also an acknowledgement that the miracle of the past 2 years was coming to an end. Sarah, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up with quiet intensity. Take my other kidney. Her offer was immediate and absolute, spoken with the same calm certainty she had shown when volunteering for the first donation. If Emma needs another transplant, take my other kidney. I can live on dialysis. She's the one with a baby to raise and a life to live. Sarah. No, Emma said immediately, her voice sharp with alarm. Absolutely not. You've already given me so much, and I will not let you sacrifice your health for me again. There has to be another option. The idea of Sarah giving up her remaining kidney was unthinkable to Emma, who had spent 2 years feeling guilty about accepting the first donation despite its life-saving necessity. Actually, Dr. Williams interjected, living donors can't give both kidneys because that would require them to be on dialysis permanently, which significantly reduces life expectancy and quality of life. But we can certainly put Emma back on the transplant list and hope for a deceased donor match while we manage her condition with dialysis. Her practical explanation provided a framework for moving forward. Though everyone understood that the waiting list held no guarantees, the months that followed were a careful balance of hope and resignation, with Emma returning to the routine of dialysis 3 times a week, while trying to maintain as normal a life as possible for James's sake. The treatments left her exhausted and weak, but she insisted on keeping up with her salon appointments, claiming that the company and conversation were better medicine than anything the doctors could prescribe. "These women have been my anchor through every storm," she told Michael one evening as he helped her into bed after a particularly difficult treatment. "I need them now more than I ever have." The salon became a place of quiet vigilance, with each woman taking turns monitoring Emma's condition and spirits. While pretending that everything was normal for James's benefit, the little boy, now approaching his 3rd birthday, had developed an uncanny ability to sense when his mother was having a bad day, responding with extra hugs and his most winning smiles as if trying to heal her through pure love and determination. "Mama tired," he would say with the serious expression of a child who understood more than adults realized, patting Emma's face with his small hands and nestling close to her when she needed to rest during salon visits. His presence was both a comfort and a motivation for Emma, reminding her daily of what she was fighting for and why giving up was not an option. Helen had taken it upon herself to research every possible treatment option, arriving at the salon each week with printouts from medical websites and stories of experimental procedures that might offer hope. "There's a new anti-rejection drug being tested in Atlanta," she would announce. Or, "I read about a woman in California who had 3 kidney transplants and is doing beautifully now." Her optimism was sometimes exhausting, but it was also necessary, providing a counterbalance to the darker thoughts that threatened to overwhelm them all. Dot's response to the crisis was characteristically practical, showing up at Emma's house every Sunday with casseroles and homemade bread, claiming that proper nutrition was essential for fighting any disease. "You can't get better if you don't eat," she would declare, bustling around Emma's kitchen with the efficiency of someone half her age. Her gruff exterior couldn't hide the deep affection she felt for Emma, and her practical support was a lifeline during the most difficult days. Bev transformed her salon into a sanctuary of normalcy, maintaining the familiar routines and comfortable atmosphere that had always made it feel like home to her clients. She scheduled Emma's appointments during the quieter morning hours, when the salon was less chaotic, and she always kept James's favorite books and toys on hand to keep him entertained, while his mother received treatment for her hair and spirit alike. Sarah became Emma's shadow during this period, accompanying her to dialysis treatments and doctor's appointments, helping with James when Emma was too tired to keep up with his boundless energy, and providing the kind of quiet, steadfast support that comes from shared experience and deep love. "You don't have to do this," Emma would protest when Sarah rearranged her own schedule to be available. "I can manage on my own." "I know you can manage," Sarah would reply, settling James on her lap with a picture book, while Emma rested. "But you don't have to manage alone. We're family now. Remember, and family takes care of family, no matter what." Her certainty was comforting, a reminder that Emma was surrounded by love, even in the darkest moments. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to change color, Emma's condition continued to deteriorate, despite the doctor's best efforts. She was spending more time in the hospital, her body struggling to cope with the increasing demands of failing kidney function. The dialysis treatments that had once sustained her were becoming less effective, and everyone understood without saying so that time was running out for finding a suitable donor. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, when the air was crisp with the promise of the winter, and the salon was filled with the comfortable chatter of women preparing for the day ahead. Dr. Williams's voice was calm but urgent as she delivered the news they had all been praying for. A compatible kidney had become available from a deceased donor, and Emma needed to get to the hospital immediately for preparation and surgery. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and emotion, with Michael racing home from his clinic, while Maggie called everyone on their carefully prepared list of contacts. The salon women dropped everything to provide support, with Helen taking charge of James, Bev canceling her appointments to be available at the hospital, and Sarah and Dot handling the practical details that always seem to multiply during crisis situations. Emma's second transplant surgery was more complex than the first, her body weakened by months of illness and the complications that came with repeat procedures. The operation lasted 8 hours, with the surgical team working carefully to ensure the best possible outcome, while her family and friends maintained their vigil in the waiting room. James, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to sense the tension, stayed close to Helen and asked repeatedly when his mama would be coming home. When Dr. Williams finally emerged from the operating room, her expression was cautiously optimistic, but tinged with concern. The surgery went well, she reported, and the new kidney is showing good signs of function, but Emma's going to need intensive care for several days, and her recovery is likely to be more difficult than last time because of the complications from chronic rejection. Her words were carefully chosen, offering hope while preparing them for the challenges ahead. Emma spent 3 weeks in intensive care, her body fighting to accept the new kidney, while battling infections and other complications that seemed to multiply daily. Michael practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, and refusing to leave except when the nurses insisted. James stayed with Helen during the day and with Maggie at night, his routine disrupted, but his spirit maintained by the loving care of his extended family. The salon women took turns visiting during the limited visiting hours, bringing flowers, magazines, and most importantly, news from the outside world that reminded Emma she had a life waiting for her beyond the hospital walls. Mrs. Patterson's cat had kittens, Bev would report, and she's already promised one to James when he's old enough to take care of it properly. Such mundane updates were precious lifelines to normalcy during the surreal experience of critical illness. Sarah's visits were different from the others, marked by a quiet intensity that spoke to their unique bond as donor and recipient. She would sit beside Emma's bed, reading aloud from magazines, or simply holding her hand in comfortable silence, her presence a reminder of the gift that had given Emma 2 precious years of health and the hope for many more. "You're going to get through this," she would whisper during Emma's worst moments. "You're the strongest person I know, and you have too much to live for to give up now." The turning point came on a Thursday evening when Emma's fever finally broke, and her new kidney began producing urine in healthy quantities. Dr. Williams allowed herself a cautious smile as she reviewed the latest test results, and the word stable appeared in Emma's chart for the first time since the surgery. Michael called everyone on their contact list, his voice breaking with relief as he shared the news that Emma was going to be okay. The recovery process was slow and complicated, with setbacks and small victories marking each day as Emma gradually regained her strength. James was allowed to visit when she was moved out of intensive care, and his joy at seeing his mother awake and able to hold him was so profound that every adult in the room found themselves crying along with him. "Mama better now?" he asked repeatedly, patting her face with the gentle touch of a child who had learned to be careful with people he loved. "Mama's getting better," Emma would reply, her voice weak but filled with determination. "And soon we're going home, and everything is going to be wonderful again." Her promises were as much for herself as for James, affirmations of her intention to fight for every day she could have with her son and the family that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. Emma finally came home 3 days before Thanksgiving, weak but alive, her new kidney functioning beautifully, and her spirit renewed by the prospect of celebrating the holiday with her family. The salon women had decorated her house with fall flowers and prepared enough food to feed half of Willowbrook. Their joy at her return, expressed through the practical acts of service that had always been their way of showing love. "I don't know how to thank you all," Emma said as she sat in her own living room for the first time in over a month. James curled up beside her and refusing to let her out of his sight. "You've given me so much, your time, your care, your love. I wouldn't have made it through this without you." Her gratitude was overwhelming, encompassing not just the practical support, but the emotional sustenance that had carried her through the crisis. "That's what family does," Helen replied, using the word that had come to define their relationship over the years of shared joys and sorrows. "We take care of each other, no matter what, and you would have done exactly the same thing for any of us if the situation had been reversed." Her certainty reflected the deep bonds that had been forged through crisis and strengthened through love. The Thanksgiving dinner that year was held at Emma and Michael's house, with tables extended through the living room to accommodate everyone who wanted to be part of the celebration. The salon women were joined by their own families, creating a gathering that represented the extended community of support that had sustained Emma through her illness and recovery. James insisted on sitting beside his mother throughout the meal, his small hand reaching for hers whenever he needed reassurance that she was really there and really getting better. As they went around the table sharing what they were thankful for, Emma's words captured the essence of what they had all learned through their shared experience. "I'm thankful for second chances," she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time in months. "I'm thankful for the gift of more time with the people I love. I'm thankful for friends who become family, and for family who never give up on you. And I'm thankful for every ordinary day, because I've learned that ordinary days are actually extraordinary gifts." The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys, with Emma's health requiring constant monitoring, but remaining stable enough for her to watch James grow from toddler to schoolboy to teenager. She and Michael decided not to have more children, understanding that Emma's body had been through enough, and that their energy should be focused on giving James the best possible childhood and adolescence. James grew up surrounded by the love of his salon family, spending countless hours at Beverly's establishment, while his mother received care and companionship from the women who had helped save her life multiple times over. He learned early that life was precious and uncertain, but also that love and determination could overcome even the most frightening challenges. The women who had supported his mother through her illness became his surrogate grandmothers and aunts, each contributing to his development in their own unique way. Sarah remained in Willowbrook, her mysterious past gradually becoming less important than her present role as beloved friend and honorary family member. She never married or had children of her own, but she found profound fulfillment in her relationships with Emma, James, and the other salon women. Her sacrifice had created bonds that transcended normal friendship, connecting her to this community in ways that would last for the rest of her life. The salon itself became a landmark of sorts in Willowbrook, known not just for excellent hair care, but for the extraordinary story of friendship and sacrifice that had unfolded within its walls. Bev eventually retired and sold the business to a younger woman, but the tradition of Tuesday morning gatherings continued, with Emma and the other original members serving as mentors and examples to newcomers who joined their informal sisterhood. Emma lived to see James graduate from high school, marry a wonderful young woman who understood and accepted his mother's medical history, and become a father himself. She held her first grandchild with the same wonder and determination that had characterized her approach to motherhood, understanding that each moment was a gift made possible by the love and sacrifice of the women who had refused to let her give up. When Emma finally passed away, at the age of 58 after 25 years with her transplanted kidney, her funeral was standing room only at First Presbyterian Church of Willowbrook. The salon women, now elderly themselves but still bound together by their shared history, sat in the front row beside Michael and James and the grandchildren who had brought such joy to Emma's final years. Sarah, now in her 70s but still graceful and dignified, delivered a eulogy that captured the essence of what Emma had meant to all of them. "She taught us that life is not measured in years, but in love," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. "She showed us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to keep living and loving. Despite that fear, she proved that friendship can be stronger than biology, and that the families we choose can be just as powerful as the families we're born into." The legacy of Emma's life extended far beyond her immediate family, touching everyone who had known her story and been inspired by her courage. The salon women continued to meet regularly, their Tuesday morning gatherings becoming a tradition that outlasted any single generation, with mothers bringing daughters and granddaughters into the circle of friendship and support that had sustained them through decades of joys and sorrows. James established a scholarship fund in his mother's name, supporting young women who were pursuing careers in healthcare. Despite their own chronic illnesses, Sarah contributed significantly to the fund, her generosity extending beyond her original gift of a kidney to encompass ongoing support for others who faced similar challenges. The scholarship recipients often visited Willowbrook to meet the women whose story had inspired their own determination to overcome obstacles and pursue their dreams. The story of Emma Richardson and the women who loved her became part of Willowbrook's folklore, passed down through generations as an example of what communities can accomplish when they come together to support one of their own. Beverly's salon remained a gathering place for women, seeking not just beauty treatments, but the kind of deep friendship and mutual support that had sustained Emma through her darkest days and brightest triumphs. In the end, Emma's life was a testament to the power of love to transform ordinary people into heroes, ordinary friendships into lifelines, and ordinary places into sanctuaries of hope and healing. The women who had shared her journey carried forward the lessons she had taught them, creating ripples of kindness and courage that extended far beyond the borders of their small Georgia town. Her story lived on in every act of generosity, every gesture of support, and every moment when someone chose love over fear, proving that the most important legacies are not measured in material things, but in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. The salon still stands on Magnolia Street, its windows bright with morning light and its chairs filled with women who understand that beauty comes not just from skillful hands and quality products, but from the bonds of friendship that transform strangers into family and ordinary days into extraordinary gifts. Emma's story continues to inspire new generations of women who face their own challenges with the courage and grace she exemplified, knowing that they too are surrounded by love and supported by the unbreakable bonds of chosen family that make any burden bearable and any dream possible.